Well, let's continue our discussion now on whether President Obama is overstepping his legal bounds. Let's ask Bernard Charbonnet. He is attorney and former chairman of the board of the Port of New Orleans. He is representing clients who say BP is hurting their livelihoods. Thank you so much for coming in, sir. We appreciate it. What happens if, in fact, this separate fund is set up? We just heard Judge Napolitano say, frankly, with all due respect to you and your colleague lawyers, it could get rid of a lot of the legal mess and just lead into direct compensation.
Well, you know, David, Judge Napolitano is right on this thing. I mean, you have to be clear that this is a necessary and safe thing to do. With BP is under enormous pressure. It's got pressure from over 130 plus lawsuits being filed. It's got pressure from the government to clean up the spill. It's got pressure from its own shareholders now that have started a shareholder suit. And now it's got pressure to raise cash. It's the only safe and necessary thing to do. It's the right thing to do. So in my mind, it protects all of the victims, provided the fund is substantial enough. If BP goes out, we're all at risk to get paid. So at this point, you set up a guaranteed fund. It's got to be the right numbers in the pot, though. And at that point, you go ahead and appoint that special master, just as the judge said, and you can probably work this thing out over time. If BP goes under and when the sizzle is gone and we don't have a fund, there may be no money to collect.
Well, we're looking, by the way,
I have to agree with the judge on this one.
We're looking right now at pictures of the president leaving his current location in the Gulf at the moment. And as he does depart, he leaves at least the perception that he's trying to come up with some, at least, ideas. And there is, of course, the question as to whether this will work. Now, the judge says as long as BP is in agreement with this and decides this just might be the easiest way to go, then the president is not overstepping his bounds. But what else would you like to see the president doing right now?
I think the president is all over this thing. He's got his U.S. attorney looking into this thing for criminal investigations. He's spending 2 days here this week. He was here last week, and he was here the week before. I mean, the guy's got his whole senior staff on this thing, and he really doesn't know how to fix this well because it's not his job. At this point, he's got BP apparently cooperating with everything he's instructing them to do. And at this point, I think he's all over this thing. At the end of the day, there's got to be cash to pay the victims. And if the president is working with BP to make sure there's a pot of gold to pay the victims, then that's the best he can do. He can't. Let's be clear on this. If BP goes under, or if it's restructured in some way that the amount of claims necessary to pay are not there, at the end of the day, it protects the taxpayer, because ultimately we as taxpayers are going to have to pay something. Well, so if the president can corral enough cash in a pot, then that keeps the taxpayers protected at the same time.
Mr. Charbonnet, we got to talk about numbers here. I know you're not going to negotiate on air with us, but at the same time, can you give us a range? We had an oil expert, Fadil Gate from Oppenheimer. We asked how much this whole thing would probably cost, you know, however long it takes, whether it's a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year process. He said probably all in about $60 billion. Does the pot have to grow to a size such as that?
It may have to. If you remember, Liz and David, about 2 weeks ago I was on this show and you asked me what would be the extent of this damage, and I told you it would be incalculable. At this point, it's still incalculable. But you got to put a substantial amount of cash in the pot to get this party started. And at this point, there's no party at all. And if BP slips, then it's over. So I think the president is right in urging them to put this cash in the bank.
But would $60 billion be the top end of the figures that you're looking at?
I don't want to answer that. Being a lawyer, you know, it's tough for me to give you the top number, but at the same token, I think that's a reasonable number to consider. Originally, I thought the president was asking for an initial payment of $20 billion to get this thing going. But at the end of the day, we just don't know. You just heard the superintendent of schools for Alabama say he wants some money now because he's not getting his checks.
Okay. Bernard, it's so good to have you. We're going to keep checking in with you. Bernard Charbonnet of New Orleans, thank you very much. Great to have you here.